The arrow found its mark in the oak tree with a soft thud, mere inches from where the child's golden hair caught the dying sunlight. Kiani froze, his weathered hand still gripping the bow, his dark eyes widening as he realized what he'd almost done. The little girl, no more than 7 summers, stirred beneath the makeshift shelter of pine boughs, her pale cheek pressed against a tattered woolen blanket. Blood stained the fabric around her left shoulder, and her breathing came in shallow, fevered gasps. Kiani had been tracking what he thought was a wounded deer through the Colorado wilderness for 2 days. He never expected to find this. Approached with the silence that had made him legendary among both his Apache people and the white settlers who feared his name. The child's face was flushed with fever, her lips cracked and dry. A crude bandage, clearly torn from her own dress, wrapped around her shoulder where infection had begun to set in. She couldn't have been alone out here for more than a day before. Succumbing to weakness, Kiani knelt beside her, his mind racing. His band had been moving north to avoid the cavalry patrols that had been hunting them relentlessly since the incident. Bear Creek. Taking in a white child would mean certain death for his people if they were discovered. Yet as he studied her, face so peaceful despite her obvious pain, something stirred in his chest that he hadn't felt since losing his own daughter to the spotted sickness 3 winters ago. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made him tense. Through the trees, he could see dust rising from the valley trail below. A search party, no doubt probably the child's family and half the men from whatever settlement she'd wandered from. They would be armed, desperate, and in no mood to listen to explanations about why an Apache warrior was found with their missing child. Kiani looked down at the girl again. She had opened her eyes the clearest blue he'd ever seen, like the mountain lakes of his youth. She stared up at him without fear, which surprised him more than anything. Most white children screamed at the sight of him. "Are you going to hurt me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. He shook his head slowly. In his broken English he said, "No hurt. Help." The hoofbeats were getting closer now. Soon they would crest the ridge and spot the smoke from his small fire. Kiani made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He gathered the child gently in his arms, noting how she weighed no more than a fawn. Her fever burned against his chest as he lifted her. "Come with me," he said softly, the English words feeling strange on his tongue. Without waiting for her response, he slipped into the deeper woods, moving with the fluid grace of his ancestors. Behind them, the voices of the searchers grew louder, filled with anger and fear. But Kiani was already planning their route to the hidden canyon where his band waited, wondering how he would explain to his war chief why he had just risked everything to save the life of a white child. The girl's small hand clutched weakly at his buckskin shirt as they disappeared into the wilderness. 2 unlikely souls bound together by a moment of impossible mercy. 3 days had passed since Kiani brought the fevered child to the hidden canyon, and the arguments around the council fire had grown more heated each night. Nalnish, the war chief, paced like a caged mountain lion, his scarred face twisted with fury. "You have doomed us all, brother," Nalnish growled in Apache, his voice echoing off the red rock walls. "The bluecoats will never stop hunting us now. They will burn every canyon, search every cave until they find her." Kiani continued grinding the medicinal herbs with steady hands, his jaw set in stubborn determination. The child who had whispered her name was Korobith lay on a bed of soft deer hides nearby, her breathing finally steady after 2 nights of delirium. The infection in her shoulder had broken thanks to the healing knowledge his grandmother had passed down to him. "She would have died," Kiani replied quietly. "A child, 7 winters. Would you have me leave her to the coyotes? Better one white child than all our women and children," spat Tasba, the eldest warrior. "Your soft heart will get us all killed." But it was old Ashki, the medicine woman who spoke the words that silenced the arguing man. "The spirits brought her to us for a reason," she said, her ancient voice carrying the authority of decades. "In my vision 2 nights ago, I saw a bridge of light connecting 2 worlds. Perhaps this child is that bridge." Kiani felt a small hand touch his arm. Korobeth had awakened again, her fever finally broken. Her blue eyes were clearer now, taking in the circle of Apache faces with curiosity rather than fear. "Thank you," she said simply, looking directly at Kiani. "You saved me." The warrior's heart clenched at her words. She reminded him so strongly of his lost daughter, Ayana, who would have been about this age now. Same fearless spirit, same way of tilting her head when she was thinking. "What happened to you, little one?" Ashki asked gently, her English much better than Kiani's. "How did you come to be alone in the wilderness?" Korobeth's face crumpled with remembered pain. "Bad men came to our farm. Papa tried to fight them, but ... She couldn't finish the sentence. "Mama hid me in the root cellar and told me to run if they found our hiding place. I ran and ran until I couldn't anymore." The circle of warriors exchanged glances. Raiders, probably renegades or outlaws using Indian attacks as cover for their crimes. It was an old story, one that made both their people suffer. "Where is your family now?" Ashki pressed gently. "Gone," Korobeth whispered. "All gone. The bad men burned everything." Nalnish's expression softened slightly, though his voice remained stern. "She cannot stay. Every day she remains puts our children at risk." But as if to contradict his words, several young Apache children had crept closer to listen. They stared at Korobeth with the same curious fascination she showed them. One brave little girl, Nalnish's own daughter Desba, stepped forward and offered Korobeth a small carved wooden doll. The white child accepted the gift with a smile that lit up her entire face. "Thank you," she said, then surprised everyone by attempting the Apache words, "ahihi." Desba giggled at her pronunciation, and suddenly the tension in the canyon seemed to ease. Children, Kiani thought, saw no difference in skin color or language. Only adults carried such burdens. That night, as Korobeth slept peacefully for the first time since her ordeal, Kiani sat watch over her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The search parties were getting closer, and soon they would have to move to deeper hiding places. But looking at this brave little girl who had already begun to learn their ways, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. 2 months had passed since Korobeth joined the band, and autumn painted the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson. The child had adapted to Apache life with remarkable resilience, learning their language with the quick tongue of youth and helping with daily tasks, despite her small size. But the outside world was closing in. Lieutenant Hawthorne of the 7th Cavalry had been relentless in his pursuit, convinced that hostile Apaches had kidnapped and probably killed the Brennan child. His patrols crisscrossed the territory with increasing frequency, forcing Kiani's band to move camp every few days. "We cannot keep running forever," Nalnish said during a tense council meeting. "The season grows cold, and our people are exhausted." Kiani watched Korobeth playing with Desba and the other children near the stream. In 2 months, she had become completely integrated into their small community. She helped Ashki gather herbs, learned to weave baskets from the women, and even showed the boys a new way to skip stones that sent them laughing into the water. "What does your heart tell you, brother?" asked Ashki, studying Kiani's face. The old medicine woman had taken special interest in Korobeth, claiming the child possessed unusual spiritual sensitivity. "She is happy here," Kiani said quietly. "Happier than she ever was in the white world. When she speaks of her family, there is love but also fear in her voice. Her father was hard with her, expected much from someone so young. It was true. As Korobeth's English had mixed more with Apache words, she had revealed fragments of her past life. Her father, Jeremiah Brennan, had been a stern man who believed children should be seen and not heard. Her mother, gentle but weak-willed, had rarely defended her daughter from his harsh discipline. "The white world will never accept her now," Tazba observed grimly. "She has lived with us, learned our ways. They will see her as contaminated, forever marked by savage influence." "Then what do you propose?" Nalnish demanded, before anyone could answer. A commotion arose from the children's area. Young Haston came running, his eyes wide with alarm. "Bluecoats!" Coming up the canyon, the band erupted into practiced efficiency. Women grabbed children and essential supplies while warriors took defensive positions. But Kiani knew this hiding place was compromised. There would be no escape this time. Lieutenant Hawthorne appeared at the canyon mouth with 20 soldiers, their rifles trained on the Apache position. He was a young officer, probably fresh from the east, with a kind of righteous fervor that made him dangerous. "Release the child immediately," he shouted. "We know you have Korobeth Brennan. Send her out and we might consider letting you live." Kiani stepped forward slowly, hands visible but not raised in surrender. Behind him, he sensed rather than saw Korobeth slip away from the other children. "There is no captive here," he called back in careful English. "Only family." Hawthorne laughed harshly. "Family? You animals don't know the meaning of the word. Bring me the girl or we'll burn you out." "No!" The voice that rang across the canyon stunned everyone into silence. Korobeth had climbed onto a boulder where both sides could see her clearly. Longer the pale, sickly child Kiani had found. She looked strong and healthy, her blonde hair now braided with beads in Apache style. "Korobeth!" Hawthorne called out, relief evident in his voice. "Come here, child. These savages can't hurt you any more." But Korobeth stood her ground, her small chin lifted defiantly. "They never hurt me," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the canyon acoustics. "They saved me. They're my family now." "Don't be ridiculous," Hawthorne snapped. "They've obviously brainwashed you. Come here this instant." "No," Korobeth said. Again, and then she spoke words that would echo in Kiani's heart forever. "I choose to stay." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Kiani felt the weight of his people's future balanced on this moment, and the fate of one brave little girl who had found the courage to choose her own destiny. The silence stretched between the two. Force is like a razor's edge. Lieutenant Hawthorne's face had gone red with frustrated rage, while his soldiers shifted nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the situation they'd found. "That child has been brainwashed by savages," Hawthorne shouted to his men, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "She doesn't know what she's saying." But Korobeth stood firm on her boulder, looking far older than her 7 years. "I know exactly what I'm saying, Lieutenant. My name is Korobeth Brennan, and I was found dying by this man." She pointed to Kiani, "who could have left me to die but chose to save my life instead." Ashki stepped forward, her ancient voice carrying surprising strength. "The child speaks truth, soldier boy. She came to us near death, fever burning, wound festering. My nephew," she gestured to Kiani, "risked his life and the safety of our people to heal her." "I don't care what lies you filled her head with," Hawthorne snarled. "She's coming with us. Man, advance and wait." The command came from Sergeant Walsh, an older soldier whose weathered face spoke of many campaigns. He held up his hand, studying the scene with experienced eyes. "Lieutenant, look at her." Hawthorne paused, following his sergeant's gaze. "What?" He saw clearly troubled him. Korobeth was healthy, well-fed, and obviously well cared for. Her clothes, while Apache made, were of fine quality. Her hair was clean and carefully braided. There were no signs of abuse, no evidence of the mistreatment he'd expected to find. "She's been treated well," Sergeant Walsh said quietly. "Sir, maybe we should hear what she has to say." "Sergeant, I'll remind you who's in command here," Hawthorne snapped. But some of his earlier fervor had diminished. Corbett climbed down from the boulder and walked halfway between the two groups, her small figure dwarfed by the armed adults surrounding her. "My parents are dead," she said, her voice steady despite her youth. "Bad men killed them and burned our farm. I was dying in the woods when Kiani found me." She pronounced his name perfectly, with the proper Apache inflection. "These people took me in when they could have left me to die. They fed me, healed me, protected me. The children became my brothers and sisters. The women taught me their crafts. The men showed me how to track and hunt." She turned to look at Kiani with pure affection. "And he became the father I always needed." Kiani felt his throat tighten at her words. In 2 months, this brave little girl had indeed become the daughter his heart had lost. But he also knew the terrible choice she was being forced to make. "Child," he said softly in Apache, then switched to English for the soldiers' benefit, "you must think carefully. If you stay with us, you will never see the white world again. You will live as Apache, face Apache dangers, know Apache hardships." "And if I go with them?" Corbett asked, though her eyes suggested she already knew the answer. Sergeant Walsh, who had clearly seen more of the world than his lieutenant, spoke honestly. "There's no family left to take you, miss. You'd likely end up in an orphanage back east. Hard places, most of them." Lieutenant Hawthorne shot his sergeant a furious look, but the damage was done. The choice was no longer between captivity and freedom. It was between two different kinds of life, two different families. "I've already chosen," Corbett said firmly. "These are my people now. A white child cannot simply become Apache." Hawthorne protested. "Why not?" asked Ashke with a slight smile. "The spirits care nothing for the color of skin. They see only the heart." Nalnish, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally stepped forward. As war chief, his word would be final. "If the blue coat leader wishes to take the child by force," he said in accented but clear English, "he may try, but she is under our protection now. She is deemed sacred to us." The standoff resumed, but something had shifted. Even some of Hawthorne's soldiers were looking uncertain about forcibly removing a child who clearly didn't want to leave. It was Corbett herself who provided the final resolution, speaking words that would be remembered long after the canyon walls had forgotten the echo of rifle shots. "I have an idea," Corbett announced, her young voice cutting through the tension like a clear mountain stream. She looked between the two opposing groups with the fearless confidence that only children possess. What if there was a way for both sides to win? Lieutenant Hawthorne laughed bitterly. "Child, this isn't a game. You're either coming with us or you're not." But Sergeant Walsh raised his hand again, his experienced eyes studying the girl with growing respect. "Let her speak, Lieutenant. I've seen enough children in my time to know when one's got something important to say." Corbett nodded gratefully at the sergeant, then turned to address both groups. "The bad men who killed my parents, they're still out there, aren't they? Still hurting people and making everyone think it was Indians who did it?" Kiani felt a chill of understanding. The child's mind worked in ways that often surprised him, seeing connections that adults missed. "What are you suggesting?" Ashke asked gently, though the old medicine woman's eyes sparkled with interest. "Lieutenant Hawthorne wants to catch bad men and protect settlers," Corbett said. "Kiani's people want to live in peace without being hunted for crimes they didn't commit. What if we work together?" The silence that followed was different this time, not tense with imminent violence, but heavy with possibility. "That's preposterous," Hawthorne sputtered. Cooperate with hostiles? My superiors would have me court-martialed. Are we hostiles? Nalnish asked quietly. We have raided no settlements, killed no innocents. We seek only to live free on the land of our ancestors. Sergeant Walsh stepped closer to his lieutenant. Sir, if I may. The girl might have a point. These raiders have been hitting settlements for months, always leaving signs pointing to Apache. Raids. What if we've been chasing the wrong enemy? Korobeth clapped her hands together excitedly. Yes. And Kiane's people know this territory better than anyone. They could help track the real bad men. Kiani looked at his war chief, seeing his own thoughts reflected in Nalnish's dark eyes. It was dangerous, unprecedented, but perhaps it was also their only hope for survival. The child sees clearly, Ashki said softly. Two peoples, divided by fear and misunderstanding, fighting the wrong war while the true enemy grows stronger. Lieutenant Hawthorne was clearly struggling with the concept, his military training warring with the logic of what was being proposed. Even if such an arrangement were possible, he said slowly, my commanding officer would never approve. Then, don't tell him, Korobeth said with the simple directness of youth. Not yet. First, catch the bad men. Prove that Indians weren't behind the raids. Then tell your commanding officer how you did it. And the child? Hawthorne asked. My orders were to bring her back. Report that you found her safe and well cared for among peaceful Indians who saved her life, Sergeant Walsh suggested. Request permission to negotiate a temporary truce while investigating the real raiders. Buy us time to prove this could work. For the first time, Hawthorne looked genuinely torn. It's highly irregular. So is a 7-year-old girl offering to broker peace between two peoples at war, Kiani observed with the ghost of a smile. Nalnish stepped forward and did something that shocked everyone present. He offered his hand to Lieutenant Hawthorne. One moon, he said in careful English. We work together for 1 moon. Find real enemies. Then decide. The lieutenant stared at the outstretched hand for a long moment, the weight of history pressing down on the canyon. When he finally reached out and grasped Nalnish's hand, Korobeth let out a delighted laugh that echoed off the red rock walls. It's going to work, she said confidently. I know it is. Looking at her bright, hopeful face, surrounded by Apache, children and watched over by soldiers who no longer seemed quite so foreign to each other, Kiani began to believe she might be right. The unlikely alliance proved more effective than anyone had dared hope. Within 2 weeks, the combined tracking skills of the Apache and the Kachi and the Fey military resources of the cavalry had identified the real culprits behind the raids that had terrorized the territory for months. The raiders were a mixed group of army deserters and outlaws led by a man called Gideon Crow, a former Confederate officer who had turned to banditry after the war. They had been deliberately staging their attacks to look like Apache raids, complete with stolen war paint and arrows left at the scenes. 17 farms burned, 43 people killed, and we've been chasing ghosts, Sergeant Walsh muttered as he studied the intelligence they'd gathered. The temporary camp they'd established in a sheltered valley had become a remarkable sight. Apache warriors and cavalry soldiers working side by side, sharing information and planning strategy. Korobeth had become an unofficial ambassador between the groups, her presence somehow making the impossible cooperation seem natural. She moved freely between both camps, carrying messages, translating when language barriers arose, and generally charming hardened warriors on both sides with her fearless spirit. The girl has medicine, Ashki observed to Kiani as they watched Korobeth teaching a group of young soldiers how to weave grass into rope while Desba and the other Apache children looked on. She sees no differences where others see only obstacles. Kiani nodded, his heart swelling with pride and something deeper, a love he'd never expected to feel again. In 3 months, This brave little girl had not only healed from her physical wounds but had somehow begun healing the wounds between two peoples. Lieutenant Hawthorne approached their position, his uniform dusty from a long reconnaissance ride. The young officer had changed during their alliance, his rigid military bearing softened by exposure to Apache wisdom and customs. "We've located Crow's main camp," he reported. 23 men, well-armed, positioned in the Box Canyon about 15 miles north. "Sergeant Walsh thinks we can take them, but it'll require coordinated action." "My warriors know that canyon," Nalnish said, joining their conference. "There is a hidden path down the north wall, but it is dangerous. Only 2 men can descend at a time. While a frontal assault draws their attention," Hawthorne mused, "it could work." As the leaders planned their attack, Corbett sat nearby with the other children, apparently absorbed in her weaving. But Kiani knew she was listening to every word, her quick mind processing everything she heard. The attack came at dawn, perfectly coordinated between Apache stealth and cavalry discipline. Crow's raiders, caught completely off guard, surrendered after a brief firefight. The evidence found in their camp stolen jewelry from raided farms, military supplies sold on the black market, and detailed maps of future targets would be more than enough to clear the Apache of the crimes they'd been blamed for. "It's over," Lieutenant Hawthorne said as they watched the prisoners being secured. "The real perpetrators are captured, the territory is safe, and ... He paused, looking directly at Kiani. "And I owe your people an apology that can never be adequate. Apologies are for the past," Kiani replied. "What matters now is the future." But even as they celebrated their victory, all of them knew the hardest question remained unanswered. What would happen to Corbett now? The temporary truce that had made their cooperation possible was coming to an end, and official policy still demanded that white children be returned to white society. That evening, as the combined camps prepared for their final night together, Corbett found Kiani sitting alone on a ridge overlooking the valley. She settled beside him with the comfortable familiarity of a daughter joining her father. "You're worried about what comes next," she said quietly. "Your people will want you back," Kiani replied. "And mine ... we cannot stay here forever. The peace we have found is fragile, dependent on men who may not understand what we have accomplished." Corbett was quiet for a long moment, her young face serious in the firelight. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day, when you found me dying?" Kiani nodded. "Come with me." "I did," she said simply. "And now I'm saying the same thing to you. Come with me. Let's find a way to make this peace permanent." Looking at her determined face, Kiani realized that their remarkable journey was far from over. 6 months later, the small settlement of Harmony Creek had become something unprecedented in the American West, a place where Apache and white settlers lived and worked together in genuine peace. Built at the confluence of 2 streams in a valley that belonged to neither traditional Apache territory nor official government land, it existed in a unique legal gray area that allowed their experiment to flourish. The settlement had grown from Lieutenant Hawthorne's radical solution to the Corbett question. Rather than forcing the child to choose between 2 worlds, he had proposed creating a third option, a place where both worlds could coexist. His superiors, faced with the undeniable success of the Apache cavalry cooperation and the positive attention it had drawn from Eastern newspapers, had grudgingly approved a trial program. Corbett, now 8 and speaking fluent Apache alongside her English, moved through the settlement like a living bridge between 2 cultures. She lived with Kiani and his family, but attended the school run by Mrs. Henderson, the former Army nurse who had volunteered to establish the settlement's medical and educational facilities. "She's reading at a level far beyond her years, Mrs. Henderson reported to the weekly council meeting, where Apache leaders sat alongside white settlers to govern their unique community. And her translation work has been invaluable in preventing misunderstandings. Kiani, now serving as one of the settlement's leaders alongside former Lieutenant Hawthorne, who had resigned his commission to help establish Harmony Creek, watched with quiet pride as Corabeth demonstrated a new farming technique that combined Apache knowledge of drought-resistant crops with settler irrigation methods. The settlement wasn't without its challenges. Some white settlers struggled with Apache customs, while some Apache found it difficult to adapt to certain aspects of white society. There were occasional disputes, misunderstandings, and visits from government officials who viewed the arrangement with suspicion, but there were also small miracles daily. Apache children and settler children played together without seeing differences. Apache healing knowledge combined with settler medical supplies had virtually eliminated illness in the community. The trading post run jointly by Nalnish and Sargent Walsh, who had also stayed, had become profitable beyond anyone's expectations. "Are you happy?" Kiana asked Corabeth one evening as they sat together watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she replied, then added with the wisdom that continued to amaze him, "But more importantly, I'm useful. I'm helping build something that matters." As if summoned by their conversation, Ashki approached them. Her ancient face creased with satisfaction. "The spirits are pleased," she announced. "I had another vision last night. I saw this valley filled with children, Apache children, white children, children of many colors, all learning together, growing together." "And what did the spirits tell you about the future?" Corabeth asked eagerly. Ashki smiled mysteriously. "They told me that bridges built of courage and love are stronger than those built of stone and steel. They told me that one small girl's decision to choose hope over fear would echo through generations." That night, as the settlement settled into peaceful sleep under a canopy of desert stars, Kiani held his adopted daughter close and marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From that moment when he'd found her dying by the trail, to this thriving community that proved two peoples could share one future, everything had changed because of a simple phrase, "Come with me." Now, as Corabeth drifted off to sleep in his arms, he realized that sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with grand gestures or dramatic battles, but with small acts of mercy and the courage to see possibilities where others see only problems. Little girl who had been saved by an Apache warrior's compassion had grown into a young woman who was saving the world, one bridge at a time. And in the end, that was the most powerful love story of all, not just the love between two people, but the love that can grow between two worlds when fear gives way to understanding. The desert wind carried the sounds of the settlement to sleep, Apache lullabies mixing with settler hymns, the soft conversations of families from two cultures who had learned to call each other neighbors, and underneath it all, the quiet breathing of children who would grow up knowing that differences were not barriers, but gifts to be shared. In Harmony Creek, the impossible had become everyday reality, and the future stretched ahead bright with promise.